on a much bleaker note, let's turn to the horrible case of Marcellus Williams, who was executed in Missouri at 6:10 p.m. yesterday. Now, this case goes back to 1998, the August murder of a St. Louis Post-Dispatch reporter, Felicia Gale. Felicia Gale's family believed that Williams was guilty, but opposed his execution, was not at his execution, which is typical of families who often go to the viewing of the execution. Now, there was no forensic evidence that ever tied Williams to this crime. There's circumstantial evidence, but even that had been contaminated. This is a very typical death penalty case where there's been sort of legal back and forth for literally decades at this point. There's been evidence in both directions. There's been a man with poor legal representation, as we've seen in filings, that things just ended up getting botched or poorly ordered or poorly argued along the way. The state Supreme Court and the United States Supreme Court both rejected last-minute pleas for Williams from Williams' camp. But this is, I mean, the prosecutor from his 2003 conviction, so 5 years after this alleged murder, did not support the execution. The family of the victim did not support the execution. There were stays granted to Williams back in 2015 and 2017, also very typical of death penalty cases. But he was executed yesterday in Missouri.
And the Supreme Court, the federal Supreme Court, by 6-3, let the execution go through. Obviously, the 3 liberal justices would have stayed the execution. The 6 conservative ones went for it. He converted to Islam while in prison. Khalifa Ibn Rayford Daniels was his new adopted name. I don't think we've talked about the death penalty. The part that has always flummoxed me about conservative support for the death penalty is that conservatives are quick to point to all of the problems with government inefficiency and screw-ups everywhere, whether it's the EPA or regulation of the markets, or they say, you know, like there's government bureaucrats, they're going to screw things up. Yet in a life or death situation, they're willing to let these county bureaucrats, you know, the same people that populate the show like Parks and Rec, like let those people handle the evidence, handle the prosecutions with an immense amount of power, very little oversight. And when it comes to life and death, you can't make mistakes. And from the conservative perspective, like governments are making mistakes all the time. And in this one, there was the defense argued that there was also racial bias because a prosecutor struck, I think, 6 of 7 black people from the jury pool, so there was only 1 black person on the jury pool, and he specifically said, I struck one of them because he looked too much like Marcellus. It's like, well, I think you just admitted what's going on here, but it wasn't enough. So, are you? Yeah, where do you come down on that question?
This issue turns me into a bleeding heart, like campus leftist. It was one of the earliest issues that animated me politically. So I'm the worst person for a show called Counterpoints next to you on this.
Well, at least you're consistent on the whole pro-life thing.
Guys, it makes me so angry. And your point about bureaucracy is such an important one. I just have a plain moral opposition to the state carrying out. I mean, I think self-defense is a legitimate explanation to take another life. I think we all mostly agree on that, legitimate cases of self-defense. I don't think the state has a right to take life like this, nor do I think it should. I think the drugs are incredibly problematic and basically forms of torture that we're also asking bureaucrats to come to conclusions on and experiment with humans on. Zed Jelani has already blasted out a great piece on this particular case as sort of a hook. In his Substack, The American Saga. His headline is, yes, innocent people have been executed, but the death penalty is also slowly being phased out. Both points absolutely true, but if we're focusing on what you just mentioned about conservatives jumping to support the state executions and death penalty cases, despite the bureaucracy being an abject disaster that is often politically weaponized and just incompetent, Zed points out in his piece this number that is astounding, but it's again, you can look all of this up. In the past 5 decades, at least 200 people who've been executed have actually been exonerated after they were executed. 200 people in the last 5 decades. So that's not just cases that are murky. This case is absolutely murky. This is not a clean-cut case. It has gone fairly through the legal system. I don't need to adjudicate whether he's guilty or not, because my position is just that it's wrong. But it's not a clear-cut case. And we have seen 200 times that after people have died, at least 200 times, because there are cases probably still to come just out of the last 5 decades, but 200 times where people are exonerated, black and white, clear-cut exonerations after being executed. So it's just, that's one, I think, very obvious argument against the death penalty that should give many people who are distrustful of government pause, but just a stunning figure. Stunning. And maybe it's because of technological advances that, as Zed points out, these trends are moving in the other direction. But we still have a spate of executions scheduled for the next couple of weeks. There's a good Associated Press story on this. I mean, it's absolutely still happening. Yeah,
a huge uptick in them coming over the next couple of weeks. Totally wild. But if we could put up F2 here, which is a quote from this local article, just to give you the background here. Faced with the DNA evidence and other new information in Williams' case, St. Louis County prosecuting attorney Wesley Bell, who defeated Cori Bush, sought to toss out the conviction on numerous grounds, including the results of the DNA testing and constitutional violations during the jury selection process. So this was the prosecutor's office saying that after reviewing the way that things were handled, they wanted to see this tossed out. It was so poorly handled that when they took the knife to get it tested, the only DNA they found on it was a bunch of assistant prosecutors who'd been improperly handling the evidence. And so once that emerged, Williams had no way of getting out of, no way of kind of proving innocence, and said, "Look, I'll take life. Just don't kill me." And the family was fine with that. The prosecutor signed off. But the Missouri governor and the judges, insisted on moving forward with it. And so if we can put up this next VO here, this is a footage of more than 1 million petitions asking for Williams's execution to be stayed, being delivered to the Missouri governor's office. Evidence of the just intense amount of public opposition to this state-sanctioned killing. And the governor just decided to go forward with it anyway.
Now, there was a moment on Jake Tapper's show that happened just last night where Marcellus Williams' attorney, Innocence Project attorney, heard the news from the Supreme Court right before the interview began. Let's roll this element.
Have you spoken to Marcellus today?
The team has spoken with him today, and actually we just spoke with him momentarily ago. We actually just got news that the U.S. Supreme Court has denied a stay.
The U.S. Supreme Court has denied a stay. That's horrible news. That means that's it? That's the end of that? There's just nothing else that can be done unless the governor has a change of heart, which seems unlikely.
That is correct. Under what we have currently from the law and the governor, tonight, Missouri will execute an innocent man. And they will do it even though the prosecutor doesn't want him to be executed. The jurors who sentenced him to death don't want him executed. And the victims themselves don't want him executed. That is what will be the state of justice tonight in Missouri.
Why do you think that the governor or the state Supreme Court, why did they deny him clemency? Why have they not stayed this execution?
And what we hear time and time again is this argument of finality. It's too late. Things should have been brought before. Things have been heard before, but they've never been heard with this evidence. They've never been heard with what this prosecutor knows and concedes to, that Mr. Williams had an unfair trial, that the prosecutor admits that he struck jurors based on their race. But we have a system that values finality over fairness. And this is the result that we will get from that.
Yeah, and at minimum, you would think that if you really want to get it right and you really got the evidence and you can prove the trial's unfair, try them again. Try them fairly.
Well, but this is what's so, I think this is what is so partially harrowing and just unsettling about these really contemporary modern death penalty cases is that he has been tried so many times and it is still a question mark. I mean, like we have gone through this. This man has sat
through so many appeals. You mean?
Right,
yeah.
right. Like this has been litigated over and over again for decades, and the family has had to put up with it for decades. The victim's family has had to put up with it for decades, and it's just incredible how you can keep going and going. I'm reading from St. Louis NPR. This is just a little bit more details on what happened because it was a lot of kind of back and forth. They write, Williams had always maintained he had nothing to do with the murder of Gail. Police would find some of Gail's possessions in a car that belonged to Williams, and he pawned a laptop belonging to her husband. But no forensic evidence like DNA, hair, or fingerprints ever tied him to the scene. He was convicted largely on the testimony of a former girlfriend, Laura Asaro, and a jailhouse informant named Henry Cole. I believe both of these witnesses have since passed away. That's how long this case has been pinging back and forth through appeals and going on for, and to end with still, again, a question mark. The case study is an argument in and of itself against the death penalty, like the way that this has all been prosecuted for decades. There are 5 executions that are set to happen in the span of a week. The Associated Press has the story. The first one was on Friday in South Carolina. There's another one, Texas, Alabama, and Oklahoma. And according to the Associated Press, it's the first time in more than 20 years that 5 executions nationally have been held within 7 days. So I think Zed is right to point out, and I think to some extent, as we were mentioning earlier, DNA evidence probably accounts for a lot of this, which is such a sad statement in and of itself. But right now, this week, 5.
Yeah, and we didn't hear anything, by the way, from Kamala Harris on this, who, when she was district attorney, often used the argument in exoneration cases that, well, you may have a good point there, but you missed the filing deadline, or you didn't make this claim of poor counsel previously when you could have. It's like, well, of course you didn't because you had poor counsel. So, yeah, her hands are not clean on this by any stretch.
Yeah, and I mean, there's obviously racial variables, but also class variables. Incredible class variables of the new class-conscious conservative movement to consider.
There you go.
So, bleak note to end on, but an important one, Ryan. Glad you got back safely.
Yeah, good time in Doha.
Ryan Grimm in the Middle East, I would be a little nervous. You've done your reporting is too good.
Well,
it's too good for you to be perfectly calm.
But it was totally fine.
Yeah. You were speaking for Georgetown, right?
Yeah, I was at a Georgetown conference and did a couple of interviews for some stories that hopefully will pan out in the next couple of weeks.
Well, we'll be watching for those. We will actually be back here before, I think, next Tuesday's show because the debate is on, or next Wednesday's show because the debate is on Tuesday.
Oh, wow. I guess I will be.
Yeah. So it's coming right up. I'm filling for Sagar on Monday, but then Tuesday we'll all be here, Breaking Point's cinematic universe.
That's right.
Maybe I'll bring some ghosts.
No Friday show this week?
No Friday show this week.
Sorry about that.
Producer Mac, we should also clarify that we have 0 paid sponsorship with Ghost. We just really like it. But Ryan's been drinking coffee, so he has plausible
deniability. It's terrible for you, but it is very good.
I don't know how it could possibly be terrible for you when it has 100% of 4 daily vitamins.
There you go.
Anyway, thank you so much for tuning in. BreakingPoints.com for the full version of this show right away to your inbox early, and it doesn't get cut up into little clips, so it's a nice little perk. BreakingPoints.com to subscribe. Thanks everyone for tuning in.
All right, see you next week.
Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.